Hey folks, it's Frederik of the FWX podcast, and I want to talk in this episode about the successor series of Avatar The Last Airbender, Legend of Korra. And we'll do that in a moment. I'll be talking about the found family team avatar that Korra has and her closest allies, because there's a lot of interesting stuff with those relationships and those people that she's involved with, and we'll be talking about that. But first, I'd like to inform you that you can like this video. You can also subscribe to our channel, which makes a video like this more available, and the video and the channel and the podcast will become more available to people who like this kind of content when it comes to animation and story items. We talk a lot about storytelling, world building, and also about action movies, franchises, a lot of stuff when it comes to Western animation as well. And I would love for you to subscribe to our channel. Okay. And then you can also share this with your friends and your family or your colleagues at your work, or maybe just here online as well. And you can comment away in the comment section, but do be polite and friendly, please. And then finally, before I begin, I'm not a native English speaker, so if I get something wrong on occasion, or if I mispronounce something, or something else happens, that's purely human and okay. Alright, let's talk about Legend of Korra. And I'm gonna get a little smaller for this because I want to show some things on the screen. So stay with me here. Here we go. Gonna put myself in a corner below here. So this is of course the Legend of Korra, and I want to start by pointing out that for a lot of people, this is not the same as the very first show, and I grant you that it's not. But also things need to evolve. Things need to stand on its own. When we're talking about adaptations, and this is not an adaptation, this is an original idea. But what is interesting about this show is also that it stands on the shoulders of that first show, quite literally, because we get a lot of information from what happens. Because this is literally about 75 years into the future after the original show, after Avatar The Last Airbender. And so we get some new stuff in this show. There's a huge technological evolution and a lot of political intrigue and socio-economical stuff happens, and it leads to a new world with things looking like they could be set in the 20th century, with also stuff crossing over from previous centuries in our current world, but then personified in animation for this show. And so we learn of a new avatar, Avatar Korra. This is her. And she is the reincarnation of the Avatar spirit. And she is originally from a water tribe. And because of this, she's got some relation with the politics of from there. But also important enough as the Avatar cycle goes. So the last Avatar before her was Aang, until Aang at some point passed away. And so the next element to be convened in this evolution of the reincarnation of the Avatar will be water. And so Korra is, in very many ways, the complete opposite of Aang. She is strong. She is very skilled. She became an avatar at very young, possibly even younger than her. There is a moment in the series where we get to see the White Lotus, the kind of secretive organization that comes to look for the avatar when needed. And they meet up with Korra's parents, and she busts into the room already using uh, water bending, fire, and earth bending. And so she's already like as an almost elementary school aged kid capable of using three elements. And the things that Aang has originally from his show is the stuff that she struggles with. And that's also a nice parallel with this show, actually, is that she's very physical and strong and incredibly skilled. She's very opposite to spirituality and deeper thoughts, and she really has a problem using those things, and because of that, she's at first not able to use airbending. But then that's where the show starts. We see her coming out of her place and gonna, I think originally she's from the South Pole, which at the point of her birth would have been way bigger. Like I said at the very beginning, it was a huge evolution in the tech, in the socio-economical side, in the politics and all of that, that the world lived up and filled up. And so Korra was born in that world, and we see her as her hero journey starts to become a fully fledged avatar, and for that she needs to learn airbending. And that's where the show starts. And so it's very interesting to see how different she is from Aang, which completely makes sense in terms of the lore of the show. Is that, and this is also a theory that I've seen online, especially on YouTube, that the troubles of the previous Avatar are often different from the ones following the next Avatar. And so, like I said, she struggles with spirituality, with becoming uh, less fast and furious. She's kind of a brat, but she's also willing to learn. And we see that through this show and through all the things that happen. And so what happens next is that she gets allies and has a fun family in her own team avatar. And those are the characters I want to talk about next. And so I know I talked ad nauseum about Korra. She's a very interesting character, being very much from the origins that of the people that Aang first met, people from the South Pole, capable of waterbending, of course, and she already knew the basics of the three elements: earth, fire, and airbending. I messed that up. I meant fire, water, and earth. Yeah, and so that's all about her. And so we get to learn about her. Also, she is a 17-year-old who is about to go through like the stuff we learn in our lives at that age, at dating, like puberty, becoming an adult, having partners, those kinds of things she also experiences. And then she meets someone, one of those potential partners, Mako, who is also aptly named after the voice actor that did Iroh in the original series. And he actually initially thinks of him as a potential partner, but then a lot of other stuff happens. And initially, he's kind of like a package deal because Mako is brother to Bolin, which is an interesting thing that happens. Is that, and I want to check something for a moment because I'm forgetting. I know they're definitely brothers, but I'm missing on the age gap. Here it is. So Bolin and Mako have a 2 year age gap. And so initially they come as a package deal because the two of them are athletes in a martial arts based sport that I'm forgetting the name of right now. And so they both are benders as well. Mako is a firebender, as evident in this picture. Very capable and skilled firebender, in fact. And the point of their story right now, Mako is capable of using lightning with a lot of ease. In fact, here's a picture of him doing that. It's a little. Uh, by the way, here's a picture of that family. So, tragedy is kind of a main thing in these two shows. Same thing with Mako and Bolin. They lost their parents when they were very young. They were murdered by someone. I believe they said it was a firebender. And the only thing that they have left from their parents, and Mako specifically, is the red scarf that he carries around constantly. And in a lot of ways, we can see easily why Korra likes Mako. Is that he is just as brash and passionate and talented as she is. And so she identifies with all those things in him and sees a potential partner in him initially. And we get the whole angsty teenager dating kind of stuff in the first season, especially with not just him but also with Bolin because of he is a bit more aware of things going outside the sport that they are practicing. He gets to know very quickly actually that Korra is the Avatar because for a long time she was secluded and isolated in the compound of the White Lotus. But he very quickly identifies her as the Avatar present in the world. But he has a very close relationship with his brother. Here's a good picture of them. They are sportsmen, very gifted benders, and they have been living together for years ever since their parents were murdered. And they had a rough upbringing on the streets of. And I have to introduce some geopolitics to the mix. And I have to talk about the fact that, well, I'm gonna show Republic City. That was the name I was looking for. So there's a picture of it. Gonna get the bigger one. Uh, so this is just one picture, of course. It's a way bigger city than that. I'll get that other one. Here's a good one. Yeah, anyway, so let's talk about the geopolitics for a moment because it's important to the story of Bolin and Mako. And so, years after the initial show of The Last Airbender, Aang and his friends set up a place that was originally going to be a Fire Nation colony after the war ended, the 100-year war. And from this city, and from this colonial city, became the center of power in the world called Republic City. And these are pictures from that city. And over the years, they worked there together to make it a cool and good city to help people from every walks of life, whether you're a firebender, an airbender, a waterbender, or an earthbender. And the city quickly filled with a lot of people to the point where it became a metropolis, as you can see on these pictures. Gonna see if I can get another one. Here's one from the very beginning of the series. There's also a lot of acknowledgement of those people. You see, for instance, here, one of the places in the city is Air Temple Island, where there is a huge statue of Aang. Here's one you can see a little bit better. That of him. You know what? I'll look that up for a moment. So there's a lot of acknowledgement about those heroes from that time and Team Avatar in the city of Republic City. And so they also kind of resemble, like in this picture right here, it's a bit unclear, but it's basically like Lady Liberty in New York in our real lives, but then in different versions of them, which includes, for one, a statue of Zuko near the train station. There's another one at the Justice Department place of Sokka. There's another one of yeah. I'm looking for all those statues, but the point is that this is a big one. This is from ah, too bad. Okay, so they all have their own kind of statues because they made this city and became leaders. Here's one of Sokka, by the way. And so they made this city, and I wanted to set this up because Bolin and Mako's life was in the city, and they lived off the streets, and it's bad way of feeding those downtrodden ones. I'll use this picture for a moment again, and Well, it's an important detail because they are from this place, and so they inform what the city is like to Korra. Kind of, they remind me of Ronald Weasley in the Harry Potter movie series, where they serve as characters on their own, but they also give you a lot of exposition when it comes to the story and sight of Republic City. And so they're from there. They have their own abilities. They are their own characters, and they're also not alone in this. But they usually become friends with Korra after the whole teenage angst dating thing. But that takes some time, of course, as you see in the series. And the other reason that why Korra is there despite gaining those allies easily is because she has to meet up with this guy, Tenzin. And Tenzin is a reflection of Aang. In fact, he's a son of Aang, and because he was a bender, because to take you back for a moment again, at some point Katara and Aang had kids. Tenzin is one of them, and because Tenzin was capable of doing airbending, Aang put all his prowess and knowledge and all of that onto Tenzin. Tenzin became a master airbender himself, and he's an absolute beast in battle. And actually, interestingly, as the fandom thing here says, he's an airbender. He's also the youngest of the three kids. He's also voiced by one of the biggest stars that there is, by J.K. Simmons, right here. And so Tenzin has two older siblings, well, who, you know what, since this is a family and he is also part of the Team Avatar, I'll talk about that because through him, the rest of his family are also kind of part of Team Avatar. And also importantly, because uh, through him, he's basically the only hope for any airbending uh, heirs until something later happens that I will talk about in a moment. And so, interestingly, as the youngest, he had the most responsibility because it was bestowed on him by his father, which leads to him living on Air Temple Island with the huge statue of Aang. And so he lives in the legacy and shadow of his father, but he is still one of the most influential people in the city, and he serves as the representative for the Airbenders on the city council, uh, in a position once held by his uncle. And yes, I am referring to Sokka, who at one point we see in a flashback has become the representative for the South Pole waterbending community in the city of Republic City. That's a lot of cities. And he's got a very interesting relationship with his family, both his brother and his sister and his parents, and then his own family, because they're all, except for his wife, airbenders. And so we get some interesting family dynamics between all of them. And then later on, and I'll touch on this too, something happens in season. I'm gonna check that out for a moment. So I'll talk about it I'm looking it up. There's something called harmonic convergence. and it's a moment inside the universe of the Avatar where the planets align for every 10,000 years, in which the spiritual world merges with the real world, and so there's an overlap, which is a key moment for one of the major villains we'll talk about in the villain video to break out of his prison inside the spirit world, and that eventually leads to that villain's escape, and which is important to talk about in a moment. And but I'll briefly mention here that eventually the team and Korra are able to push this villain back in his place in that prison with some help from the really huge lore from the show, where in in short, Korra has been attacked, is so defeated that she has to go back and basically re-identify who she is, which also includes her avatar spirit. So she goes back into the past. We get an episode about the very first avatar called Wan, that's Wan, and his trials and tribulations. Remember the hero's journey I talked about? Full video by clicking the card. And we get to see the story of him becoming the first avatar, and he then closes the spirit world off from the real world. And in this moment from the series itself, uh, Korra reverses that, and she is then responsible for something else that happens that is relevant to what I was just saying about the Airbending family. Is that because of the increase in spiritual energy, some interesting things happen. So there's a theory out there on the internet that after the harmonic convergence, a lot of the people that were suspected of, well, not suspected, uh, they had long held dormant, well, something happened that all of a sudden a lot of people were able to airbend again. And there's a theory out there that these were all descendants of airbenders that once escaped the genocide that Aang also escaped from at the time. And so we're talking about 175 years ago, something like that, when the initial airbender genocide happens, which Aang ran away from. That became his story. And now the influx of so much spiritual energy has resulted into new people getting airbending abilities. I almost said born, but that would likely also happen in the process, which could be an interesting factor for the new show that is about to come out in one of the next years. Because there's going to be like another Avatar show with a new character in a new setting in this universe, and they might return to a apocalypse style of setting again because it's called Seven Havens, and so there's only a few locations left in the world where people can live because something cataclysmic happens. So I'm betting myself that something interesting will be happening with the Airbenders in that series. But back to this series, because the fact that there are new Airbenders is then the key plot for season 3 of Korra. The Legend of Korra. And we get a lot of new interesting characters in that season 2, including one of those airbenders of that family I was just talking about. And I'm gonna get back to Tenzin and this lovely picture right here. So Tenzin, youngest son of Aang. Maybe there's a bigger picture. Nope. Okay. So maybe I can get it a little bit bigger now. Just a second. So here's a picture of them, of Aang right in the middle, and with Katara, and then their 3 children. And so the youngest here, that's Tenzin. Then you have the little girl, who is Kaya, who was named after Katara's mom. And then Bumi, the oldest of the 3, who is very much takes after his uncle, like Sokka, but in a way different way. And what happens here with this family is that Bumi ends up being one of those airbenders regaining abilities. And so he discovers for himself that he can actually airbend too. Just there was just something that needed to happen for that to really happen. And so that's part of the dynamics and the animation and the story that we see is that Bumi struggles initially with his airbending because he never thought he could do it. And so we get a lot of family dynamic and drama with these 3, and this is just a little version, of course, but so here's the initial family of Tenzin with his kids and his wife. There should be a picture close by of his other family members. Just a second, I'm gonna just look this up for a moment. So I'm gonna look this up differently. That's not clear enough for me. Just a second, guys. Okay, let's just go with this picture right here. So this is Boomy. This is the oldest one of Aang's kids. He takes a lot after his uncle, after Sokka. He's very much a goof, but initially he has a lot of experience too because he used to be in the Republic City's military in the United something fleet. In fact, he's the admiral. Admiral Boomy is called, and obviously he gets his name from Aang's long lost friend that we see in this picture right here, King Boomy. So he's just as equally of a goof as that old cracker. It's an interesting picture. So there's a lot of family tension and drama between these 3 because you have such differences between them, with Tenzin being an airbender at first and always was, Gaia being a waterbender, being a bit more like who exactly? She's named after mom's mom. But she seems to be a bit more like I'm remembering Ty Lee because at one point she tells about I joined a circus. I did a whole bunch of things. I went around the world. She's kind of a combination of her uncle and Toph, while Boomy, like I said, has military experience, but is very much also takes a lot after Sokka as well. And so there's a constance of the old show intermingling with this show, but that makes it so interesting, in fact. But they don't really oversaturate you with this because the show needs to stand on its own, and it does. But I wanted to add these characters because they're very much close allies of Korra in the later seasons because we get to learn about Kaya and Bumi later on. Well, Tenzin and his family, and I'm gonna address them right now as well. And so, like I said, they are all airbenders except for Pema, Tenzin's wife. It's not that huge of a picture. I'll just give. I'll try this one for a moment. Nope. I'll just get this one. So, Tenzin and his wife Pema have three kids. Sorry, four kids. There is Jinora. She's the oldest. You have Iki. That's the one right here. You have Milo, who kind of takes after his grand. Who also kinds of. Sorry, I'm gonna say that differently. He also takes a lot after Sokka. He's very much a goof and a bit of a brat as well as he grows up. And then the youngest is Rohan, who, if things work out in the timeline, might end up in that future series we're getting with Seven Havens. Because at the end of the last season of Legend of Korra, Rohan has grown up quite a bit and is almost about to be a teenager. It's a gift of them. So this is Jinora, this is Iki, this is Milo, and they're the three of them are airbenders. We don't yet know if Rohan is an airbender, but it's most likely that they are. And yeah, I wanted to insert these kids too because they very much act like allies, but are also like honorary Avatar Team Avatar members, and they're a force to be reckoned with as well. In fact, one of the things that gets touched on a lot with this show is the subbending, which are different abilities from the initial bending, elemental bending itself. And I wouldn't really say it's the subbending, but one of the things that Milo does, for instance, is use, well, the other way of producing air from one's body, farting, as like a propeller for himself. And we get to see that with moments. And it's ludicrous, it's kind of gross, but it's also funny. Like farts usually are. That's kind of the whole. I think I just described what farts really do. Gross, ludicrous, but kind of funny. Anyway, so that's a lot of them. Huge family, very interesting family. A lot of family dynamics and drama, and they're kind of a hanger on, but they're very important, cool allies because they're the only airbenders in the world at first. But then harmonic convergence happens, and we see a lot more of them because they can become so vital. Especially also because I think this is at the end of season 3. Hey, guys, by the way, if I got something wrong, like I think I'm about to do, please correct me in the comment section below. I have no problem with being corrected. Okay. But maybe you could do that in a polite and friendly way too. Okay. So I think it's at the end of season 3 that we find out that Korra is so damaged by what she has been through. I'll spoil why later. But she's so damaged that they take up the role of becoming the world's peacekeepers, like the Avatar is supposed to. But the whole point of the monoistic order that they belong to, with the air acolytes and the airbenders initially, is that they're peaceful folk, but they're also very capable fighters and all of that. So they become like a peacekeeper force, but with diplomacy first and fight later, possibly. And another interesting thing here that also happens is that, as you can see in this photo right here, very faintly, is that Jinora becomes a master airbender, which is a proud point for Tenzin himself, because for so many years he was the only one. And then he had to have his own arc. And part of his arc is that living in his dad's shadows and shoes, and his legacy is that he thought he was neglecting people in his life, but then realizing that he was not his dad allowed him to become himself more and be a more fuller person, a three-dimensional character, in which is his whole arc. And it's also just a delightful family and one of the best comic relief things that you will find in this series. All right, I want to mention somebody else very important, less important initially, and that's Asami. And so Asami initially is the daughter of one of the villains in the series I'm going to mention in my villains video next. She's the daughter of Hiroshi Sato, who is the inventor of what cars would be in that world. I think they just call it cars in this world too. And so it initially ends up for her being like a rival to Korra, because she has the hots from Mako initially, but then they gradually open up towards each other, Korra and Asami, and initially they stay good friends until something more blossoms. And at the very end of the series, we see that they are now partners, which is delightful. And I think there's a ton for representation when it comes to people from the LGBTQ plus series. And also another interesting thing, there's a theory out there that when an avatar gets to the point where they have a romantic partner, the theory is that the romantic partner, their looks, might often be what the next avatar's appearance is based off. So if that's the case, this new avatar that we're gonna have in the Seven Havens show will look a little like Asami, or a lot. But I think it's such an interesting thing to do, to get a character so interesting as Asami, because um, what's different from her and the other three, Korra and Bolin and Mako, is she's not a bender at all, but she is very capable. She's a fighter. She is feisty. She is strong. She's an innovator. She inherits her father's imperium after the things that he does, which I will talk about in my villains video. And she becomes a CEO basically, and she tries and does interesting new projects, which includes upgrading the city that she was born in, And she really becomes a fully multidimensional character in herself and at the very end, as you see in this picture, the partner to Korra. And like I said, which does a huge thing for representation of people of who love the person of their own gender. Yes. And this is for me personally also an interesting thing because I'll make this a little bit personal by going back to me for a moment. Um, and I'm not saying I'm that way myself, but last years have been kind of eye opening for me because I've come to realize that I get easily attracted to people in terms of their personality and their intelligence. And that's really what I'm personally attracted to. And so I've become a bit more open to the fact that people can love who they want to love. And that is possible in the real world, but also in fiction, like I've just been explaining. And so representation is a huge thing, of course. And that is clearly shown in this show, too. Like I said in my uh, last Airbender video, is that initially we don't really think of Katara and Sokka as the people of color in that show, but they are. It's not that evident because of the shading and all of that and the color use. But then you watch the show and you realize that, yeah, actually they do. And actually, the more that I look at Asami, I head back to the character and on the screen for a moment back, is that she initially does too, just in the other way. And which is perfectly fine, of course. Like I said, I've become more open in my life, and so I'm very okay with this kind of thing. And that's basically Team Avatar of Legend of Korra, which is Korra's significant other in the end, Asami, her two best friends, which is Bolin and Mako. A bit more information about them is that we see that Mako is pretty perceptive, pretty smart. He becomes a police officer and detective later on in the series, while his brother, being a goof, kind of falls more for manipulative kind of things. Becomes a movie star at some point. It's called different in the show, motioning pictures or something like that. Although it is totally very. He kind of has the appeal of a celebrity in the show. Good looks, capable, talented, but he's kind of a goof. He has a furry friend, by the way. Did I mention that? A little red panda like friend with a name that I'm forgetting right now. But it's part of his character arc, which eventually also something very interesting happens for Bolin as well. I said that the show touches on the subbending quite a lot. One of the things that we see when it comes to Bolin is that he gets a brand new subbending elements that we have been hinted towards what happens for him in the heat of the moment, pun intended, for him as they are getting away from somewhere. He, by sheer courage and rash rudeness, develops the skill of lava bending, which is something between firebending and earthbending, and being able to bend temperatures as well. And so that's very interesting for him. And I want to point this out to the others as well. So Bolin ends up being a lava bender, earthbender, very gifted. While his brother is way more of a, I guess, a sharp shooter in his case. Tends also he tends also to be a little bit more vicious and a little bit more cruel. We also see, well, kind of like I was saying with Sokka in the original show, Sokka ends up just straight up killing a guy, but not really knowing it. Something similar happens with Mako as he offs one of the other villains on the other side, which who I will talk about because it's a terrifying villain. Just in the look of her alone. But we'll get to that point. And also, since I was talking about subbending, so one of the things about Korra is that, like I said, she's very studious, she's very brash and hot headed, and very assertive. And the subbending thing that happens for her is that she becomes the very first avatar that we know of that also develops metal bending, which is initially uh, there's some more lore about the metal bending, if you know it from the initial TV series of Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Toph develops that skill, and then, well, this is part of the lore anyway of the new show. So after doing that, after the initial series, Toph goes on a journey. Actually, I should talk about those people too. They also become allies. So the Toph side of things and her family, because in the end she also ends up with a family, also become huge allies for Korra. Well, I'll use the family tree for a moment, or not. Look it up differently. Here we go. Here's a good picture of them. It's in black and white, and maybe I can find a better one. There we go. Get a bigger picture here. So this is the larger family of Toph. So after all of her adventures, she settled down at a middle bending academy, and there she settled down with someone and had kids, which includes all of them, the larger family. I'll look up those names because I don't know them by heart, but I'll try my best here. So I'll look them up anyway. But I know that the dad, that her daughter, because this is her daughter, by the way, and her husband is Badar, this man right here, with the glasses, and they have one, two, three, four, five kids. That includes two twins, and then a daughter, Opal. She becomes a huge ally of Korra's team Avatar. She's also a very capable Earthbender. Uh, I'm gonna say that different. Uh, she ends up being not an Earthbender, but an Airbender, which is part of that harmonic convergence thing I was talking about. And you have an artist kit, which is this one, and the two twins are two Earthbenders themselves. And then there's Bedard Jr., who ends up being more of a technician and strategist, who goes on to work for one of the villains I will talk about next. But then, of course, I'm missing someone here. I need another picture. There we go. Small picture, but I'll get it bigger. Ah, here we go. So, Dove met two different men, had those two kids. That includes one of the first people we see in the series, the police chief in Republic City, Lin Beifong, who is the chief of police in in Republic City. I'm repeating myself, but that's really for you to really get it. In case you are from a place that hasn't seen the Avatar series, both of them. So, and their arcs are also very interesting. But it's basically like the two halves of what Toph initially was are divided up in her two children. Lin is the more serious one, very capable metal and earthbender who has some interesting things happen and also becomes to accept Korra even more because initially that is not the case. And because of family drama with the other family I was talking about, Aang's family. And then there's Sue, who was a bit more adventure type, but eventually settled down and had, like you see, three kids. Sorry, five freaking kids with her husband, but Dar Senior. Like I said, but Dar Junior, the strategist, um, and painter and scientist and all of that. Not a painter. He's a strategist, scientist, and in the very last series he becomes the significant other for the final villain in the series. That includes his other brother as well, Juan, who is a metal bending artist, a painter, basically. Opal, who ends up being the one being an airbender and becomes Bolin's romantic interest. And then there's the two twins, Wei and Wing, who are two athletes, I will say. They made a game up by themselves. Kind of a metal bending version of soccer, basically, like we know it in our real world. And so there's a lot of strife, a lot of family drama with this one, with Tenzin's family, especially because at one point, our dear old Tenzin, with his lovely family, not this photo, yes, nope, nope, excuse me, ended up, I'll say it again. So, good old Tenzin, Mr. Nice Guy here, with the nice large family, ended up dating Lynn. So it's interesting how initially the Air Nation representative ended up dating the chief of police, but when they were younger. And another interesting thing about Lynn too is that back in the past, when they were still kids or teenagers, really, um, Sue had a falling out with her sister, and that led to a moment where Lynn got a scar on her face because the metal bending police in Republic City has sort of metal bending whips that they use to get around, and she had a lashing on her face from one of those whips, which results in a scar of her. Look up a better photo of her. It's not big enough. This one. Yeah, this is pretty visible right here. So she has a scar from that incident, from the falling out of her sister, and she has her own arc. But she's also a freaking badass. Pretty much every character in this series is a freaking badass in some way. And there's also a lot of comic relief as well. Mostly by Tenzin's family, but through Bolin a lot. Which is in a good way to convey to younger audiences of that a show needs to be fun for people to watch. It can be all serious at the time. You lose people that way. And I think that's about it when it comes to this show for a moment. And telling you about Korra's. Head back to Korra for a moment. That about does it when it comes to her team Avatar and her allies. There's a few more, but these were just about the most important ones. So, guys, that is it for this video and the moment. So back to me. So thank you so much for listening and watching to this episode of the FWX podcast. Before I go, you can still like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel that makes this video and the channel and the podcast become more popular, becomes more available online here on YouTube. And if that happens, I will be grateful for you to do that. I love talking to you guys about these types of things when it comes to action, animation, uh, magic, all the storytelling aspects as well. And I would love for you to do that, to subscribe to our channel. And then you can also share this with friends and family or the people that you know in your life, including your work colleagues, or maybe just here online as well. And you can comment away in the comment section below. And please tell me if I got something wrong. If you're okay with that, I'm okay with it. Completely open to feedback as well. And finally, I hope to see you in the next video because I will do one more and that will be about the villains of this show of Legend of Korra and Aang's series as well. So, guys, thank you so much, and I will hope to see you in that next video. See ya.